Who's familiar with the term synchronicity? Hands? Many, most. So synchronicity was a word perhaps coined by Carl Jung. And he did so in his collaboration with the quantum physicist Wolfgang Pauli. Jung sought synchronicity in his life and in his therapy. I was talking earlier about quieting your mind as therapists. I've learned that there's a deeper way of knowing than simply my rational, intellectual way. And I wouldn't simply call it intuitive, because intuitive, the word conjures up guesswork, hunches. But when you learn to integrate your intellect and your intuition, intellectual intuition, that's the basis for synchronicity. Synchronicity is a powerful way of knowing, individually and as therapists. So I began to study synchronicity, and I realized that when my worldview changed toward inseparability, towards entanglement, toward oneness, and I could quiet my thoughts that distracted me and fragmented me, intellectual intuition, synchronicity began to arise. And I employ that more and more often. Early on, it was like astounding. I can't believe that. I'll give you an example. I was working with a client who was telling me his plans for the weekend were to go flying in his brother-in-law's small plane. I'm comfortable with flying in small planes. A very dear friend of mine flies, and I used to fly with him. But this sense of dread and foreboding overcame me. So I was in a quandary. Do I share that with him or not? I had a couple of days till he left for the weekend, so I thought, I'll wait. I'll reflect on it. My next client came in the door, and I'd been working with her for many years, and her face was pale, ashen. And I said to her, "What's wrong?" She said, coming up the stairs, she got a text that her niece had just been killed in a small plane crash. And I thought, oh, I wasn't amazed. I was shocked. Now, I can't do that on demand. Right? You can't come to me and have me tell you your future. But this happens increasingly. So very often in a session, my client will say, "How did you know?" "I was just dreaming about that last night." Because we're entangled. We're as one. Just like that photon that's separated, there is one. When I shifted my belief system and my worldview, particularly with my clients, we became as one. Now, for me to do that, I also have to have a predisposition where I have nothing to hide. I don't share personally with my clients to be friends. I will only share if it is purposeful, and I think it will be therapeutically beneficial. But synchronicity is the most powerful tool, individually or as a therapist. So I used to teach it. When I first started to develop this process, I taught groups which I called emergent thinking. And I was teaching in one session how to come into synchronicity. And I was having a thought during the break in the session, and I shared the thought with the group. And my thought was that my younger son had just started driving, and I forgot to put him on my insurance. We were seated at a long table, and I'm at the end. Everybody on the left, oh, I left an important piece out. During the break, my son had called, but I wasn't able to get his phone call. What did his call mean? The people on the left side of the table thought that my son was simply calling to remind me of the fact or advise me that I need to be on insurance. The people on the right side thought he just had an accident, needed to have an insurance card. Now, under different circumstances, there'd be no reason to correlate his phone call to the insurance matter, but we're all tuned in to synchronicity. So I thought that was interesting. I made a note that night. Was it just coincidence that everyone on the left side thought one thing, and everyone on the right side thought another? I let that thought linger. The next day, a client comes in to see me who was in that group, but she wasn't there that night. and had no contact with the group members. And she shares a thought with me. She said, you know, Mel, reality is weird. It's like a radio dial. You dial it to the left or you dial it to the right, you pick up a different reality. Ah, more synchronicity. That tuning in is powerful. So if you're interested, you can learn to reframe your perspective of reality. And how do you bring into synchronicity into mind? By not thinking it's weird, by actually thinking it is normal. During the tsunami, I forget what year it was, I was with my family on vacation in Cabo San Lucas. And they used to have very condensed parts of the New York Times delivered to the hotel. And I read a report that said there was no reported death of wildlife during the tsunami. Animals have a sixth sense. They knew it was coming. So I went up to my room to write an article. My article was, humans used to have that sixth sense too. But with the advent of rational thinking, with Newton, with Descartes, it severed our mind and body and our intuition. We lost that sixth sense. As I'm writing the article, the window is open, a bird flies into the room and perches itself on the armrest of my chair. And I was getting tingles, I was just otherworldly. So I write an email to a colleague who has written books on synchronicity. He teaches out in California. Some of you may know him. His name is Leslie Combs. Many books. He wrote a book called Synchronicity, Myth or Trickster. And I say, Leslie, what do you think? He writes back, he says, great synchronicity, but it goes further, Mel. He said, when I opened your email, I was reading a book by Rupert Sheldrake called How Animals Can Predict Earthquakes. And then it continues. Rupert Sheldrake, for those of you who don't know, is a famous biologist in England. He wrote some best-selling books. One is How Dogs Know When You're Coming Home, How Your Dogs Know When You're Coming Home, and developed the theory of morphogenesis. So Sheldrake and I talked, and we ended up meeting and speaking at Yale together on the shared topic of synchronicity. It's a quantum way of knowing. It is not limiting. It operates at warp speed. Again, I can't summon it, but sometimes it's simply there. And synchronicity is full of wonder.